exception. If there's a manifestly unfounded complaint, then you don't need to consider it. Okay, just a couple more. In terms of service, this is about sort of setting out how people to be protected from illegal content. If you've got basic content moderation and complaints processes, these are the rules of the road, if you like, and these terms should be easy to find, laid out and formatted in a way that helps your users read and understand them, written to a reading age comprehensible to the youngest individual permitted to use the service, and usable by those dependent on assistive technologies. Again, this is largely giving force to what is in the Act and is a basic legal requirement. Finally, there is one universal measure to help us tackle terrorist content. So if the provider has reasonable grounds to infer that a user account is operated by or on behalf of a prescribed organization, it should remove the account. So if you become aware that a user account is operated by a prescribed organization, such as a terrorist group, you should remove that account. Obviously, this relies on there being user accounts in operation. Okay. Just a couple more. Once you have gone through your risk assessment process, once you have decided on what safety measures you need to implement those measures and keep a record in case we come and ask you for it at some point in future, or you need to otherwise demonstrate your compliance. So again, I'll refer you to our digital support service, our digital toolkit. That contains a template for your record, and it contains a bullet point list of essential records that you need to keep. Protection of children's duties. We're happy to come back and do a later session on that. But there is any service in scope of the regulations need to carry out a child access assessment, which is essentially a process of deciding if your service is likely to be accessed by children, and if it is, you'll then need to carry out another risk assessment on further types of harmful content to children. That guidance on the child access assessment includes case studies, some of which are posted on the screen here, so you can refer to those case studies as you undertake that assessment. Just to signpost some of the resources that we've made available, we have a regulation checker which runs you through the scope of the Act, contains most of the information that I ran through today with some additional guidance on certain points. Hopefully that's helpful to many people. If you're looking for a definition of what a significant number of users is, I'm afraid that won't be there. But there is other guidance on different bits, whether you're a user-to-user service, for example. We publish important dates for online safety compliance, and we publish a number of quick guides to get your head around the rules at a high level. As I said throughout this presentation, we have a step-by-step toolkit which helps you tailor the recommendations based on your inputs, so based on your features and functionalities, based on your risk levels, etc. You can sign up for updates from us, and we are running events and webinars like this one from time to time as well to try and explain the rules. That may be my last slide. Yes. So just a Q&A from there. I'm aware that I've covered a lot of material there, and there will be lots of questions. As I said at the top, we start from a proportionate perspective. The rules set out in the Act are the rules set out in the Act. We will have done some things that make it easier and some things that make it more difficult as Ofcom, but we are here to try and find a way through so that we focus on where harm happens most, not where it doesn't happen. And we want to make sure that you can run a safe service with the minimum amount of administrative burden. So I'll finish on that message, unless Rachel or Andrew want to come in with anything on the presentation.
Come in now if you want to turn your slides off. So thank you very much. We have had a lot of both questions and comments. And I think, so the big issue here, I think if we're really honest about it, is that many of the kinds of sites that people here run are not what was in mind when the app went through, and that the nature of running what might be a hobbyist or a small site means that you probably weren't looking at all the consultations that happened. And I think what we have to be realistic about for the next half an hour is that we are not going to change the underlying rules. As I have put in the chat, I would be very interested in and happy to coordinate some more possibly helpful activities around that, potentially writing to the Ofcom board, say, or the Secretary of State as needed. And I think we need to think about the difference between how we can use the next half an hour to answer specific things, and then separately what isn't working that we need to question. And so they're two very different things. I know we're not going to get to everything that everybody asked. I think a few of the things in the Q&A have been covered. I noticed, for instance, there's a question about timely removal of content, which I think you covered, Ali. What I'm going to do now, I'm not entirely sure how this works. I've got a few people queued up to ask questions, and I believe I might be able to click on their name and something magical will happen, but I'm not sure. So, right, I'm going to start with Jazz. I'm going to turn you on. That's okay.
Yes. Is the microphone connected?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ali, thank you. For putting this together. Really appreciate the opportunity for folks to talk with you directly. So my question, and I know Rachel, you have my question, but I am going to add a little preface, if I may. I represent in most part the Fediverse, or the open social web, a growing network, 30,000 small sites, about 15 million social media accounts, in many ways strongly aligned with regulators worldwide, right? Social networking landscape less dominated by foreign megacorps, focused on safety, local regs, local governance, local norms. These sites provide service, social space for underserved, vulnerable minority communities, right? So how does Ofcom plan to ensure that compliance expectations for these small, low-risk community sites remain proportionate, and what specific guidance will be provided to help those platforms identify and mitigate potential risks without placing undue burdens on their very limited resources?
Yeah. Thanks, Jazz, Michael. That's really a really good question, and it's something that we really want to make work as best we can. I think there's a few key points. First of all, proportionality is embedded in Ofcom's approach. We actually have a duty, the growth duty, that applies to all regulators to consider the costs of measures and minimize any unnecessary burdens. So we do that when we go through the process of developing, in particular, our codes of practice that require specific action. So we look at that when we're putting together measures, safety measures, and who they should apply to. As I said at the top, we're also extremely proportionate in not only in our use of our enforcement powers, and we don't need people to be unduly scared where they're trying to do the right thing. I would say that we're both proportionate in when we exercise our powers and how we exercise our powers. So the when is that we are really focused on instance of egregious harm, and the how is that we start with engagement and we work through a process of understanding a service and gathering the right information we need to make a decision. In terms of practical guidance, we have published a few things that we hope will help. So we started with the quick guides around consultation. We've now published our digital service. We've developed that service, by interviewing around 50 smaller service providers. So we've been gathering feedback and doing user testing with some of our end users. I'm sure there might be some people on the call who would like to be part of that in future, which would be something interesting to explore. And we will keep iterating and developing that service to improve the guidance and its accessibility. I think the template is something that we've provided to try and make it easier to complete your risk assessment. And then also we will be considering developing this presentation and the material we've run through today further, so that there is a clearer minimum set of actions that are required if you're a small and low risk service. I guess finally, it's worth saying that this feels like a lot of work, and I hope that there is perhaps a peak the first time you do it of how difficult and complex this is, and it can become easier over time. So if you've done a risk assessment, you can update it next year, and if you've put in place the basic measures, having an accountable person accepting complaints, then that is done. It might be that you are doing a lot of this already. I suspect you're not already doing a risk assessment for 17 types of illegal content. That's fair enough. But accepting complaints or having a means to take down illegal and harmful content, you may have that in place already. I've started waffling slightly now, so I'll stop there.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I think I hear your sentiment, and I hope you're hearing your stakeholders' sentiment that they are indeed very scared.
All right, I'm going to take us to Melissa now, who has a question. If you're ready, Melissa.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to ask whether to begin with, and if it does, how the Online Safety Act might affect community-based born digital archives, which do not have any interactive elements, so no user to user, but may have a facility for users to generate content by uploading things that the archive, whether that's photographs or texts, that the archive is created to preserve.
Thank you. Thanks for your question, Melissa. I suppose I would start by looking at the scope questions, your number of UK users, your target market, etc. Secondly, about looking at whether you constitute a user-to-user service, and that's all about whether users can share and encounter content posted by other users. Can a user encounter content posted by another user? In terms of if you're able to upload images and other users can view them, that sounds very likely to be a functionality that's within scope of the Act. We have a project, for example, on file sharing services, where we know that there can be some high-risk instances of file sharing, particularly in regard to child sexual abuse imagery, and that's one of our strategic priorities, so we're tackling it. But that's not to say that every place that an image is shared is the same level of risk. So if you have that functionality and you are in scope, you need to go through the process that I've described today. Complete the risk assessment, use our template and our digital service if you want to, and then look at how the specific measures might apply to you. If you're high risk of certain harms, there will be different measures, and happy to talk through those at some other point as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I'm now going to go to Terence.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for running this, Rachel. It's been fantastic, and really appreciate the chance to speak to Ofcom on this. I run a community site. My budget is zero. I am a hobbyist. I'm not making money off this. There is no money here. I was wondering, are there any free of charge or open source tools that Ofcom have seen to allow us to comply with some of these things? So I'm thinking about child sexual abuse material or age verification. I appreciate you probably can't recommend specific providers, but I'm wondering if you have conducted any market research to see if there are any free or open source tools to help us to comply with what you're asking us to do?
Yeah. Thanks for your question, and thanks for engaging with us. So in terms of what we've published, I don't think what we've published would be described as open source, but if we can make what we have published more accessible, very interested to hear how best we can do that. We've already given ourselves a slap on the wrist about certain document formats that we've published, for example. So we're looking at that. I've already mentioned broken record time, digital toolkits available, and the guidance available. In terms of open source, I don't think we have anything specific that we've recommended. Where we're looking at specific mitigation, so where we're looking at age assurance or at hash matching for CSAM, we've done detailed cost assessments of what that costs for providers of services to implement. We've engaged with many of the organizations who run the hashing databases, such as the RWF and others, so that we understand how it works, what their capacity is to work with regulated organizations and or individuals, and to make sure that we are only recommending that at an appropriate level. So our recommendations on who needs to do what are mindful of cost. I don't know if anyone else wants to, from the Ofcom team on the call, wants to add anything on that. So I suspect it's not particularly as useful as you might hope, but interested to hear what kinds of interventions would be most useful for this community so that we can consider it.
No, thank you. That's very clear. So what I'm hearing is, if I'm very low risk, then I possibly don't need to do age gate verification. And the assumption is that if I do, there's probably a commercial body behind me, which may or may not be true, but I do appreciate that response. Thank you.
That's right. I'd just add on age verification and estimation. So it's not currently part of our illegal harms proposals. That might develop in future. For example, if we need to introduce extra protections around offences that affect children, that comes next in our protection of children phase. There is a bit of a black and white rule around pornography. So if you allow or host pornography, then you will need to use highly effective age assurance. And that we've taken a principles-based approach there, and that might be via a third-party supplier if you can't implement it yourself. But that only applies the age assurance measures only apply in certain scenarios, and there is a risk assessment process to go through there unless you're directly publishing porn.
Are you happy there? Do you want to come back with anything, Terence?
Well, just as it was going in the chat, CSAM, for example, is something that concerns everyone. So again, for a zero budget site, do you know of a CSAM scanner? It's a tongue twister, isn't it? A CSAM scanner which is zero cost or free to use, or can be self-hosted.
I need to bring in some of our specialists here.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm not looking for an answer right now, but yeah.
Yeah. Let me take it away to our teams. What I would say is that I mentioned risk level tables earlier, which specify our guidance on how to decide whether you're low, medium, or high risk. We've published specific tables on CSAM and some of the other child-related offences. So there's far more specific advice to help you decide that risk level, and that will inform whether you need to look at a CSAM hash matching service. So if you self-assess as low risk, you won't need to use that. If you self-assess as medium or high risk, then I think if you're high risk, you will need to do it. And medium, it may depend on size, but I would need to check. So don't take that as read. But in that case, we'd be very happy to give advice on how that measure works in practice.
Just listening and kind of taking host prerogative here, it seems to me that one of the issues is that if you're a small or a large business, you're likely to have a trade body behind you who will do both coordinating and communicating, which nobody here has. I think Neil has taken on that role on his own. And I'm wondering, in terms of adapting to a compliance regime, whether it might, whether there may need to be some kind of intermediary coordinating body here, because I can't see that most people will have the skills, confidence, time, resource to do some of the things that are being talked about here. So they're more likely to be closing down or pulling back. So just to float that. Serena, I think you're next. I'm just going to come to you in the thing. There you go. You're on.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, I'm Serena. I am the founder of Good Community. I focus on online community trust and safety. So my question is, what advice would you give to charities and startups who are stretched for resources, but are really worried about the impact of non-compliance?
I would. It's a great question. I would start by saying we understand the challenge. I mentioned at the top, having to deal with some small scale compliance issues in my community running club, and dealing with data protection and dealing with health and safety and things like that is a challenge. And often it's about best efforts in a complicated scenario. So I would suggest, first of all, that you see what expertise is available within your community or organization. So if you've already done other compliance exercises around data protection, it'll be interested to see how you've managed that process. Our digital tools are a good place to start, so that you can check whether your service is in scope and then go step by step through our guidance. We hope that means you don't have to read thousands of pages of guidance and can save you many hours by going through the process. And then finally, I would provide the reassurance that if you're making efforts to do what you need to do and to have those very basic measures to protect your users in a user-to-user or a search environment, then Ofcom will always recognize the efforts that you've made if we ever end up speaking with you. So that would be my sort of top tips and a little bit of reassurance there.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, I work with a lot of small charities, particularly charities that are doing anything from gathering people who are connected, in terms of fundraising or in terms of activists or even patients or carers that are affected by health conditions. Of course, a number of different potential safeguarding ramifications there. So I'm aware there are a lot of people who are trying to do their best, and they probably have a number of these processes already in place. They just probably don't have the same terminology that they're using. But I just want to make sure that we're capturing there's a non-profit sector out there. Most charities are quite small. So I'm really hoping that they're going to be able to get clear guidance and move things forward. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We often hear that examples and case studies are helpful for us to produce, and that's something that we'll look at increasingly in the next few months, and as we develop our materials further.
Great.
Right, we have one last question, which is slightly different to as advertised. I'm going to go to Pauline Roach. Hang on one moment. I'm having a slight technical meltdown here. Right, Pauline, you're on.
Thanks, Rachel. Really enjoyed the session, and I tackled digital exclusion in community organisations around Birmingham. My question is about WhatsApp groups set up by community organisations. When are they covered by the Act? And they are WhatsApp groups which are either broadcast, so only the organisation that has set it up can send out flyers and information and stuff, or they're moderated, but only some of them are only moderated during office hours. So they're the conditions under which these community groups, as the previous speaker said, you know, I'm working in a community who may not have a high level of digital skills, and so they're going to feel terrified by this and think they, like when the DPA came out, they'll think they have to stop all activity.
Yeah.
So please provide some reassurance. Thanks.
Yeah. Hopefully this is reassuring, Pauline. If you're not the provider of the service, then I don't think that the regulations will be your responsibility to uphold. So WhatsApp is, I assume, a service provided by Meta, and they face legal obligations, and they will have a risk assessment to fulfill, et cetera, et cetera. If you are a business user, you're still a regular user of that service. So my working assumption would be that if you're using a service that is provided by somebody else, someone else controls who can use that service, they're responsible for the systems and processes that govern that service, then the compliance responsibility sits with them. If you are a user, the obligations don't apply to you.
And is that definitive? Can I quote you on that? I need to be able to say to these community organizations, you don't have to worry about this.
I think it's really difficult for me to say sort of without having our lawyers in the room and things like that. But what I can say is the provider of the service is responsible. If you're not providing that service and in control of that service, then it's not your responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
Right, we're at the end of the prearranged questions, and I see we have a hand up, and I'm going to go to Owen. Give me a moment when I find you in the list. You seem to not, which it seems to have come out of alphabetical order. Hang on a minute. I'm not a Zoom user in the scheme of things. Right, you're on.
Can you hear me okay?
A bit louder if that's all right.
Okay, I just wanted to expand on that last question where I might be patronizing you, and if so, I apologize. But WhatsApp and Telegram and other systems can have closed communities within them where I might be one of a small number of people who can control who is or is not in that group of group chats, as it were. Are you saying that, at least as you think at the moment, and clearly you might need to check with Ofcom's lawyers and so on, are you saying that because Meta or Telegram or whoever are providing the service, that I could boot somebody out of it doesn't change that I am not the provider in terms of compliance here?
I'm trying to think how to approach this with the most helpful answer. So unfortunately, we haven't done a complete study of how such groups work within certain services and closed communities. But ultimately, the service provider, the Act defines the service provider as who controls the who can and can't use the service. But clearly, there's a chain of sort of functionalities and abilities here, and that ability to add and remove users and control access is provided to you by the service and whoever's designed that feature and functionality. So what I can say with confidence is that the provider at the top of that tree has responsibility. I wouldn't want to sit here and rule things out on the hoof, not because I don't agree that that's a logical interpretation of the law, but because we're wearing a regulator hat, and if I give the wrong advice here and send people away with the wrong advice, then that's going to be inherently unhelpful. But I would emphasize that the regulations envisage systems and processes put in place by the provider of the service. So if you're a user of a service, seeing some fruity comments coming in there. Thank you. I think it's essentially, my default would be that it is the provider of the service's responsibility as opposed to the user. I'm sorry that that's not as clear as I would like it to be for you just now, Owen.
would that be something perhaps that you could seek to get more explicit guidance on, along with all the other things you're being asked for?
Yeah, I think we're going to do a big exercise in taking away what we heard at the conference, what we've heard here, and Rachel shared some pre-submitted questions, so we can try and draw out the key themes and respond on that.
Thank you. That would be very helpful.
In particular, I know there's a lot of questions about Mastodon. I'm wondering if one of the Mastodon admins in the group would like to put their hand up and ask a question. Kyle, right, we have a flurry. Hang on a minute. Who have we got? Kyle and Tim. Why don't I turn you both to speaking, and then you can.
Hello, thank you, Rachel, and also thank you for everyone at Ofcom who's here. I run a mid-sized Mastodon instance, about 700 users, and like most of the 31,000 Fediverse instances out there, we do allow pornography. Last week, Alice Glossop from Ofcom said that that would make it generally likely that we have a significant number of UK users, and I'm trying to understand if that means that we have to shut down public access to web pages, RSS feeds, and federation with other instances, because those would allow minors potentially to access pornography.
Let's go to Tim as well, and then take them both together.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi there. Yeah, like Kyle, I run a small Mastodon instance mostly for a kind of specific low-risk community of people. We have some UK users. One of the specific challenges with Mastodon and with federated services in general is we end up hosting content that isn't from our specific users, because it's kind of come from other Mastodon services we federate with. And I was wondering if Ofcom had considered this case, or has any advice on this, where you end up presenting content which comes from users of some other service that isn't necessarily your own.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's two sets of issues there to deal with. Tim's first, and then come to Kyle's. Tim, it's a very good question, and I know that some of the colleagues in the chat have been thinking about how this works in practice. There are instances, forgive the use of the terminology, there are situations where you could have a single user a single user federated service where you're the only user posting, and because you're also the provider of the service, that may not fall into scope because you're the provider of the service and you're just publishing content. Where other users can interact with other user-generated content, it becomes a bit more of a grey area. And I acknowledge that I can't give you a definitive answer on that today. And I'm sorry if that doesn't surprise you. So we would have to go and look at it. I think there are people in your community who've started to work through some thinking here, and it's something that I think Ofcom will need to look at if it helps us, achieve our mission of tackling harm online. Turning to Kyle's point, as I said earlier, pornography is subject to sort of slightly more specific rules under the Act, and the thrust of the legislation is that children are not normally able to encounter pornography. So there are different routes. If you publish your own pornography, or if you are a user to use a service that allows user-generated pornography. But the point is that if children would be able to encounter pornography on your service, then they should be protected from doing so through highly effective age assurance. So appreciate that is a challenging requirement, but it is one that we are putting in place across the whole of the market, from the large pornography services to smaller ones. So those that are direct publishers, we've started to write to now to advise them of their requirements, and then when the protection of children rules for user-to-user services come in from July, we'll be engaging there as well. I can't remember if those are the other parts of either of those questions that I've missed. Apologies. You might want to. Is there anything I didn't respond to?
Do either of you want to come in? Carl, you look like you're off mute. Yeah, great.
I suppose the question is, are we in scope of the OSA? Is there any way in which we can say that we don't have a significant number of users with, a few hundred UK visitors, or are we just screwed and have to shut down?
I think you'd have to look at the context of your service. I mean, if you have a few hundred UK users, you're going to need them to make the judgment on whether or not that's significant. We know from all our research that children access porn, which makes it potentially more likely that there will be children on your service, and potentially more likely that you fall in scope of the duties. I think it's unfortunately a judgment call that those subject to the regulations will need to make. So I will have to leave it there and recommend that if you make that decision, or you either way, that you should document your sort of logic there, so that we can in the event that we need to talk about it, you've got that reasoning recorded. We are hoping that in the fullness of time, the highly effective age insurance market will continue to evolve and costs will fall. But I appreciate that isn't necessarily helpful in the here and now. That's a strategic piece where there will be sort of more providers, more methods and technologies that allow highly effective age insurance to take place.
Can I just? Well, I'll move us on. I did have another question. There's quite a few people who have been asking about the comments on comments issue. I don't know if you'll be able to answer that, but I'm wondering if either Graham or Neil or anybody else would like to come in and ask that question. You're looking for a hand up? No? Okay. Do you want me to? I will. Oh, we do have a hand up. Great. Neil. There we go.
Can you just note if you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Ali, thanks so much for going through all this for probably the third time in about a week. I do really appreciate it. You kindly provided some feedback to the register about the issue of comments on comments. And I think people are trying to unpick the distinction between a service which is exempt because it falls within Schedule 1, but then it allows comments on comments which don't appear to be exempt under Schedule 1, but do fall within Section 55. Is there a clear guide for sites which do have comments and do allow comments on comments or off-topic comments? Is Ofcom likely to approach them as falling within Schedule 1 and so exempt, or within Section 55 and so not exempt? They still need to do their risk assessment, they still need to do their recordings of things, they just don't need to assess comments on comments.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fair and well-informed question, Neil. Thank you. I think I might start by trying to sort of explain the function of this, because it feels really ill-designed in some ways. I think you could argue, but I think the exemption is there to make sure that if you're reviewing something you've purchased online, that that might be a common functionality that this legislation is not designed to interfere with. So there's an exemption for sort of reviews and comments. Equally, there's protections for sort of if you're posting a blog and users are interacting with it, that there's an exemption that covers that. I think the problem arises if you have that functionality available, and bad actors make use of that being a place to post content that they feel that they can get away with hate offences, with unpalatable material that would be considered to be illegal. So I think that's the kind of purpose of the legislation. It's not to really sort of fixate on types of services that are or aren't necessarily in scope. It's to make available a reasonable exemption for sort of that kind of interaction on published content, and to and to make sure that where such spaces are manipulated or misused, that the regulations can capture those. So that's the intent. So I haven't answered your question in terms of where sort of off-topic sentences, comments would be covered by the legislation or not, but I'm trying to give you the broad intent. So I think you could make an assessment of your service with that in mind, and yes, I think the backup element of scope that I mentioned earlier was essentially, yes, there's a question around user-to-user services, there's a question around a significant number of users, but there is that backup of, if you're capable of being accessed in the UK and there's a reasonable risk of significant serious harm, then you should consider yourself to be in scope. So that is a backup assessment that you can make. I've said a few things there, Neil. I don't think I've answered the question directly, but hopefully that is some context that may be helpful.
Thank you. It is useful context. You're right. I don't think it really went to the heart of the question, which is, if I run a blog and I allow comments and I allow people to comment on my comments, do I still need to do an assessment? Am I exempt under Schedule 1 or somehow caught by Section 55? But if there's scope for Ofcom to look at that and perhaps publish something on that, I think that will be reassuring to an awful lot of people who run travel blogs, food blogs, whatever it is, to know, are they in scope of the regime, or are they out of scope but have to do some kind of assessment, but not for comments? But I appreciate you taking the time to think about this.
Thank you, Neil.
I'm not sure we're necessarily going to get very much more achieved in the next 6 minutes. So I'm going to draw us to a close. I'd be very interested in picking up with anyone who is interested in some more strategic activity here. In the meantime, we'll download all the questions in the chat and try and make sure that there's like a reasonable answer to those. I am aware that the time overall is running out. We've got just over a month. So it's worth, I think, thinking collectively about what might be done fairly swiftly. But thank you to Ali in particular for dealing with an absolute onslaught. I know it's probably been very hard work. Thank you to everyone for engaging. And we'll be in touch, I think.
Yeah.
I hope to get something a bit clearer.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. We will take away the key themes and see what we can do on the issues. And so thank you for drawing them together, and thank you again for running this. Where we've not been able to be helpful, it's not because we don't want to solve the issue, or we don't agree that it's an issue. It's because it's often because if something were to really go wrong in one of these issues, in one of these instances, or in one of these scenarios, and we've said it's fine, that's a really difficult position for Ofcom to be in. So I do appreciate that it's frustrating when you're trying to do your best and the regulator is not giving you clear answers. But I will finish with the note